Welcome to another From Insight to Action Show Sparks combination webinar where we're basically sharing and presenting to you thought leaders from all over the world and also business innovation ideas. We're going to do these webinars once a week, failing some other mishaps, so stay tuned for that. I'm delighted because today I have on the program Niels Pflaeging, who's put together, I think, probably one of the best summaries of what goes through, what companies go through in rethinking organizations, organizational change, and the whole process. And I will mention particularly there was one page that struck me because after being in an event recently where somebody said to me, "Oh, consultants, they just tell you what you already know." And that Niels has a lovely page in there that sort of says, "No, we're here to work together on the system," and which is really the spark behind these conversations. But it's absolutely true. None of this stuff can come out of the eyes or minds of one particular expert. It's how we all work together, which is the very spirit behind these conversations. So today I'm going to now turn to Niels, and let's just start off, Niels, with why don't traditional ways of organizing work now?
Why they don't work. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's part of the things that consultants tell you that everybody knows somehow about, right? Well, there are so many angles about why conventional ways of organizing don't work, and I've been working on this topic for 12 years or so now. First with the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, who started the research that I'm elaborating on in this book as well, and in previous books I wrote. And at the time in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, we said, well, the problem obviously is that command and control doesn't work any longer, which I think is one way to frame it. Centralization, bureaucracy, hierarchical command and control management, that doesn't work any longer. I think everyone has a hunch at that, right? That's also how we met in the Stoß network, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's basically...
I should mention we did the podcast on the zombification of management, which was heaps fun. So. Exactly.
So we all have a basic understanding that somehow the old ways don't work. Okay. At one point, at a certain point, I started to frame it like in a way that says, okay, let's not call the problem command and control anymore. Let's call it management, because management is that technology, that social technology or artifact from the industrial age that we apply to organizations everywhere in the world. In most organizations apply it somehow, and it is broken because this division between thinkers and doers doesn't work anymore. So one of the ideas behind this book is to explain why that is broken and why that cannot go on forever, why command and control, why management, why the old ways of hierarchical pyramid-like organizing and the metaphors that come with it, why this is done, and that this has to do with complexity in value creation. And I wanted to make that point in this new book, and also what the alternative is, because I think very importantly, it's not just the problem that we have is not just that people don't get that the old ways are broken or the old ways don't work anymore. I think the main transformational problem, or the problem why we don't see more organizations transforming themselves to a better model, organizational model, that lack of transformation has to do also with a lack of vision of the new model, where to move to, what to transform to. And so many of us are, I think, are hesitating to propose the new model or to clarify it, and that is the idea of this book as well, to show that there is an alternative model that has been applied by pioneers like Toyota and W.L. Gore and Handelsbanken and Southwest Airlines and Aldi in Germany and DM Drogeriemarkt and so many companies, Whole Foods among them. There are so many pioneers of a new model in Europe, in the US, and many other countries as well, even in Brazil, where I lived for a long time. So there is an alternative model. There is the old model. We understand that very well. We often are lacking the language to describe that new model, and this to make this distinction and to explain the two models and why it's necessary to transform from the old model to the new one. That is, I think, our struggle right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the most intriguing parts about this contrast between the old and the new, so to speak, is that people that are in the place where traditional models they're under a lot of pressure. and there's a certain amount of resistance to move away from what you know and you're familiar with. Not resistance, that's not fair.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
more uncertainty about moving from where we've been to a completely different thing. But let's jump into what are the options and how easy is it to move from, I mean, it's not like jumping across this massive Grand Canyon thing to get from one side to the other. Let's look at what those options are and how to make it easier for at least mentally, and emotionally to look ahead and know how to move forward.
I think you just suggested a wonderful metaphor. It's not a Grand Canyon. Because in the world of social technology, of organizations, the jump that you the change challenge, it is as wide, as difficult as you imagine it is, somehow. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And you just put that very nicely in, okay, there seems to be resistance, but it's not resistance, and I totally agree with that. The problem is not that people are resisting to transformation, is that they simply cannot imagine how to do it in their own organizations. I think that's the main barrier. For example, if I talk to somebody at a large conglomerate, an industrial organization, or a large software company, or whatever it is, or a public organization, or a medium-sized older firm or so, people just cannot imagine that this new model, it's possible here as well, because we observe other people's behavior within the old context and say, no, I think they don't get it. The others don't get it. They cannot do it. I cannot imagine that they want to make the jump. And that's, we are lacking thinking tools to imagine the transformation, the organizational transformation necessary. And and we also confuse, and that's one of the topics in the book as well, we also confuse the normal challenges in transformation. In the book, I compare that to sweating. If you do sports, sweating is normal. If you do change, some behavior that you can confuse with resistance is normal. So organizational sweating is necessary in that kind of transformation. We just have to start with the right assumptions. And for example, we have to start with the assumption that everybody is capable of wanting and also to perform, to work in that new kind of organization.
Is there one question that a decision maker who's thinking, recognizes in a place in their company and whatever level, whatever tier of or function they're playing, are looking at ahead and going, all right, I recognize we need to change. Now what? Is there one question that can help them see what lies ahead that would, or one particular area of thought that would help them recognize what those next steps are?
I think I'm very biased on that question, right? And I think if you have an organization with 200 or 200,000 people, what you need to have a critical group, a core group in the organization capable of imagining this alternative model, what it looks like. And that's why, you have a copy of the book. That's why I put in this kind of illustration to make it, to make it easier to, this kind of visualization. We have the difficulty of not having the metaphors and the language to visualize this kind of model. And I think the starting point is not a question. It is acknowledging that there is a case for change, a case for transformation, that we are in a mess. The Sto's manifesto put that nicely. We all have a clue that we are in a mess. Now, we are actually lacking the language to imagine the other model, and that's what in my work at least, it's paramount to help people understand what this different model that I call beta, what it looks like. For example, in the traditional mode, we always talk in metaphors of pyramids and top down and command and control steering, that kind of stuff, and breaking down and doing waterfall things, all metaphors that rely on hierarchical thinking. And the alternative, for example, you need alternative language to describe that new, radically decentralized, radically networked kind of organizational model. And for example, you need the distinction between center and periphery. And you have to understand how that links to a center periphery, how that links to the market, what the roles of center and periphery are, which is totally different than in a pyramid kind of mindset. So to introduce this language, this thinking, or the notion that a department is something different than a cell in the new model, and that steering doesn't have any space or doesn't have any place in modern organizations, that we need more market-based coordination and the mechanisms that organizations need for that. All that kind of, I think, there's not one question that will lead people to adopt or to accept transformation, but we need a thinking model.
The other thing I see in here, what you're saying, though, that's exciting, and I've seen this, and I've had these conversations with people in companies, is there's always a group who recognize, what has to happen. They can see the change underway. They don't feel good about the direction culturally, and they're ready to step up and say, look, I want to be a part of this. And they come from both top level, the executive level, and also from the actual wording level. So that earlier idea you had of just, what you mentioned earlier about everybody, just those people that are the core group that recognize what can be done, are really the catalysts for change. And regardless of the size and the structure of the organization, it's really that critical mass of purpose and vision together. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. When I started, for the first time, started working with actual workers, factory workers on this kind of transformation. When I started, we only developed this kind of approach that I'm explaining in the book, this transformational approach. It has elements that many people are familiar with, like the models from John Cotter and so on transformation. But some of the methods I think are quite fresh and come from systems theory and other complexity theories. And when we applied that for the first time about 8 years or so in consulting projects, and we started working with actual factory workers, we had this kind of moment where we had mixed groups of managers, and maybe an owner was with us as well in the workshop, and factory workers. And after 5 or 10 minutes, those factory workers, they would say, oh, I get it. That sounds really correct, and we should have done it forever, right? Unfortunately, we thought management didn't like this kind of thinking. That kind of stuff. So you have this mutual recognition, but you have to create the opportunities for people to recognize that they don't, for example, factory workers, they don't want to be controlled, they don't want to be steered, they don't need a plan, they don't need a budget, they can behave actually very responsibly. We just have to outline the kind of model that we want to operate in. So the book is all about organizational models, how to make it explicit, the kind of transformation that we need. And I also thought that, think that one of the problems that we have within our kind of community, Dawna, is that we tend to explain. Maybe we explain too much, and we give people too little tools and methodology to get to conclusions and solutions on their own. I have a great belief that we have to give people theory and thinking models, thinking tools, so that they can actually change their organizational models and organizational practices.
Yeah, I totally agree. And along with that comes basically asking a whole lot of questions that your brain can't answer.
Yeah, one of the basic difficulties I think that we have in organizations is that everyone thinks he or she already understands everything.
Yeah,
it's like we all went to school, so I know what a good teacher is like. That is total nonsense, right? We all went to school, and we think what a school would look like. No, we don't have a clue. Usually, what a good school in the 21st century should look like. We have references that date back to the industrial age, and which was wonderful. So in organizations, it's just like many of the thinking models that we have are totally flawed. They don't work. One of my favorite topics is that, planning cannot work in organizations today. Strategy is a totally flawed concept as well in today's complex organizations and market environments. We don't need org charts. We have to replace them with a different thinking in terms of value creation that flows from the inside out and so on. We have to model organizations differently. We need different kind of processes. We actually have to rethink our understanding of human nature as well, because we have so many prejudices about other people's motivation or not being motivated in our heads. So this is the kind of riddle I think that we have approached, the mental models.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And what's inherent in that, I think it's quite exciting because, first of all, it gets daunting when you think, oh my gosh, we're going to change this whole structure into something else. But in reality, it's not that complicated. It's actually very organic in a certain way. And I think that's the huge opportunity that sits in front of pretty much any company that's working with the traditional model and wondering how they can adapt to a much more complex system.
Yes. Oh, that's another great point. I have thought a lot about how long this kind of transformation would take in any company. And one of the answers I came to is that it will never take more than 2 years. Transformation, full-fledged transformation, it is not an endless process. It is not 5 years. It is never 7 years. It's for the software developers among those seeing this, it's natural that only in waterfall, in traditional project management, you would say, oh, this project will take 7 years. This piece of software to develop will take 7 years. It will never happen. We all know that.
Yeah.
So you have to deliver constantly, for example. That's what we say in agile project work. And with organizational transformation, it's very similar. What I always tell my clients as well is, you have to understand that after 2 years, you will look back and you will not be able to imagine going back to that previous command and control model. You will not be there totally, but you will see the gap that you look back to the other side of the gorge. You mentioned the Grand Canyon, right? Exactly. And you would say, no, I never get back there. I never want to go back there. But organizational transformation, it is extremely complex. It is not trivial, but it will not take longer than 2 years. That's what I always explain my clients in detail. Changing mental models, it requires maybe half a year, maybe a year and a half. And having the first profound changes, the first profound transformational changes may take up to 2 years all in all, but it will never take longer. It's just that you have to approach it right. You have to, for example, you cannot develop a solution behind closed door and then roll out. That's the old way of change management thinking, right?
Yeah. Niels, where can people go for more information?
For more information, yes. Well, to buy the book. Yes. I hope everyone will buy the book, and many, many copies. Of course, that's the Amazons of this world. The ebook, as for now, it's only available on my website, organizeforcomplexity.com.
Okay.
And to get a hunch at the work I'm doing and the kind of content to expect from the book, I always have these many, many white papers that online on betacodex.org and on SlideShare. So there are many, many papers in here that are quite rich, literally hundreds of pages of white papers, and very highly visualized, as is the book as well. Excellent. Thanks, Niels. And for viewers, next week, 19th of June, I've got the next Spark the Change conference going on. The information is posted on the website from insight2action.com. I'll just flag that up so you can see. And it's going to be with Helen Wilson from Gamevy in London, UK, along with the Happy Startup in the UK, and also PropellerNet. So looking forward to having that conversation. Niels, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for having me, Dawna.